Great afternoon, CALABARZON. Mabuhay, Pilipinas. And good morning, United Kingdom. Yes, you heard it right. We are streaming live via DepEd Tayo CALABARZON and DepEd Philippines official Facebook page. You can also catch us on the CELCon 2021 YouTube channel. Do not forget to subscribe and share. Mga kababayan around the globe, welcome to day 2 of our CALABARZON English Language Conference. This is Greg Loberia Sangalang from the Division of Cavite Province, City of Tagaytay, and I will be with you for the next 3 hours as we engage ourselves to our keynote speaker this afternoon. Kaya naman, can I have heart reactions from our fellow teachers? Come on. Can you give me heart reactions, mga kababayan around the globe? You may also leave your comments and share our live stream with our official hashtags, CELCon 2021 and hashtag IamCELCon. All right. Do we have comments there from our viewers? Heart from Sir Tutor Darren. I believe Sir is from Rizal. Ma'am Sheila F. Adia, hello. Good afternoon, Ma'am. Ma'am Irene Libet, good afternoon. Ma'am Catherine Leiva, good afternoon also. Ma'am Andrea Senadoza. And Ma'am Victoria Burgos, I believe from Tanawan City. And Ma'am Christine Joyce Capistrano. Thank you so much to our more than 100 viewers this afternoon. Yesterday, we listened to a very insightful topic from Dr. Roby Marlina of CIMEO RLC, where he highlighted the importance of multiliteracy in globalizing times. We also witnessed the notable reading programs of select schools in CALABARZON. And our day 2 started with parallel session rooms where our innovative English language teachers presented their action research. Day 2 is not yet over. We've come to the highlight as we listen to another engaging topic. Please welcome our regional coordinator, Dr. Bernadette Alonso Condes, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good day, everyone. I am Bernadette Alonso Condes from the Division of Quezon. Today, we are now on the second day of CALABARZON English Language Conference. It is indeed a great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Our keynote speaker stands at the forefront of lexicography. She is the current World English Editor of Oxford English Dictionary, or OED, at Oxford University Press in the United Kingdom. She began her takeoff in OED as consultant editor in 2014, and her experiences in the past decades made her one of the world-class lexicographers at present. As a polyglot, she is a native speaker of both Filipino and English, and she is highly proficient in written and spoken Spanish. Moreover, she knows basic French and Italian, and she holds knowledge in reading Catalan. She has a tremendous number of publications of monographs, edited volumes, articles, and textbooks which are written in both English and Spanish. Furthermore, she has a profound knowledge as international speaker, talking about world Englishes like Singapore English, Hong Kong English, Philippine English, and Korea English. And most importantly, she's the person behind the inclusion of Filipino coined words in Oxford English Dictionary like kilig, pasalubong, kikay, and balikbayan. Everyone, Please help me in welcoming our keynote speaker this afternoon, a world-class lexicographer and world English editor of Oxford English Dictionary, Dr. Danica Salazar. Calabarzon educators, let us give her a virtual applause.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Hello, my name is... Right, so thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's afternoon over there, and it's morning over here, still quite dark. But I would just like to say that it's a great privilege for me to be able to join you this afternoon. And we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about world Englishes in the Oxford English Dictionary and its implications in English language teaching in the Philippines. So let me just see if I can share my screen so you can see my slides. Having a bit of a technical difficulty over here. So, okay, let me see. Hello, can everyone see my slides now? I hope so. Right, so the topic that we're going to be talking about today is, as I said, Philippine English in the Oxford English Dictionary, and we're also going to talk about the impact of this in English language teaching in the multilingual setting in the Philippines. So you may have heard. So you may have heard in the news in the past few years that quite a number of Filipino words have made it into the Oxford English Dictionary, and the news that news has been met with a lot of excitement generally by Filipinos. But what we're going to do in the next hour or so is find out more about how this happened and what these words are and what can it tell us about English language use in the Philippines and how that affects how we teach the English language in our own Philippine context. So I'd like to start by explaining first what the Oxford English Dictionary is. So the most important thing to know about the Oxford English Dictionary, or the OED for short, is that it is an historical dictionary. So as an historical dictionary, if you look at an OED entry, you can see that the definitions or different senses of the word are ordered of every entry are ordered chronologically, so from the earliest sense to the most current. And every entry in the OED shows the full history of English over 1,000 years. So even obsolete and disused words and senses are included in the dictionary. So even if a word has become obsolete or rare or archaic, although some other dictionaries would take away these words, in the Oxford English Dictionary, we still keep them because we consider them to still be part of the history of the English language. So each sense in every OED entry has dated quotations with citation information. It also has a detailed etymology as well as a full history of forms. Now, just to show you what the difference is between uh, a general dictionary of current English and a historical dictionary like the OED, let's look at this entry from Lexico, which is the publicly accessible online dictionary that contains data provided by Oxford Languages, which is the department in Oxford University Press, which is also home to the OED. So you can see here the lexical entry for CSIG. So everyone knows what CSIG is. So you can see on this entry that you have the head word, of course, and then you have the pronunciation section where you can see the word transcribed in the International Phonetic Alphabet or IPA, and then you also have a blue play button there with that if you click on it, you can actually hear the word being pronounced. And then you have the part of speech, which tells you that it's a noun, that sisig is a noun, and a mass noun. And then the definition that tells you that in Filipino cuisine, sisig is a dish of chopped pork, onions, and chili peppers seasoned with calamansi and topped with an egg, usually served on a hot plate. And then if you click on the plus, you can see some example sentences of the word being used. And then it tells you at the end that the origin of the word is the Kapampangan language. So far, so good. So that's an example of an entry in a current dictionary of English. Now, if you look at this entry, which is the entry for CSIG in the Oxford English Dictionary, you can see that immediately that there's a difference, that the OED entry is much more dense, but you still have the similar information. So you can see, of course, that there's the head word, there's a part of speech that tells you that the word that CSIG is a noun, and there's also a pronunciation section, but you can see that in the OED, there is not one, but 3 different spelling variants. So you have a pronunciation variants. So you have the British variant, and then a US variant, and then a Philippine English variant. So if you click on those blue play buttons, you can actually hear the word sisig being pronounced in the British pronunciation, in a US pronunciation, and in a Philippine English pronunciation. And then you can also see the pronunciations transcribed in IPA. And then after that, you have some frequency information. So in this part of the entry, you can see that the more red dots there are, the more frequent a word. So you can see that there are only 2 red dots for C6. So that means that in the English language as a whole, it is not that frequently used. And then you have the etymology section, which tells you about the origin of the word. It tells you that the sisig is a borrowing from Kapampangan, so from the Kapampangan word sisig, which is attested in the Kapampangan language from the 18th century or earlier. And then we move on to the definition section, which states that sisig in Filipino cookery is a dish consisting of chopped pork, onions, and chilies, usually served on a hot plate, seasoned with calamansi, and topped with an egg. I know, I think a lot of us are Tagalogs here because we're in Calabarzon, but I know that in Central Luzon, in Pampanga especially, this definition is quite controversial because you acknowledge that that the original sisig is not garnished with an egg, nor is it served on a hot plate. So, but the thing with the OED is the main definition has to show the most common manifestation of whatever it is that is being described, that's being defined. So unfortunately, for more purist Kapampangan cookery enthusiasts, the most sisig as a dish has already been influenced by other parts of the Philippines, and the most common form of the dish now is the form that's served on a hot plate and topped with an egg. However, in the OED, we do have space to explain that development. So you can see that following the main definition, there's a small type note that tells you about the origins of the dish sisig. So it tells you that traditional Kapampangan sisig is made with chopped pig's head, so the mascara, call it, head and liver. But then you also say that later popular versions can be made with other types of meat as well as fish and tofu. And then we also mentioned it's typically eaten as an accompaniment to alcoholic drinks. And then we cross-refer to another OED entry for the Philippine food custom of pulutan. So you can see that compared to the other dictionary, that in the OED you have much more space to talk about a word and its development in more detail. And then following that is another thing that makes the OED quite unique, and that is what we call the quotation paragraph. So in the quotation paragraph, you see short extracts from actual texts that show you how the word has been used in English throughout its history. So the very first quotation is the earliest use of the word in English that OED editors have been able to find. So in the case of sisig, that's an article from the National Midweek magazine published in 1987. So 1987 is the earliest evidence that we could find of the word sisig. So that does not necessarily mean that nobody ever in the entire world or in the Philippines ever used sisig before 1987. Of course, spoken language is something that exists, and words probably were first used in speech first before being used in writing. But in the OED, we include only written texts in our evidence, or not exactly. It doesn't have to be written, but it has to be something that can be dated. So the earliest dated quotation that you found for sisig is from 1987. So that just gives you an indication of around which time this word was first used in English. And then that is followed by other quotations from 1995, from 2001, and finally in 2017 from various Philippine publications such as the Filipino Reporter, Business World, and the Philippine Daily Inquirer, that shows you the different way, just shows you how Filipinos have used the word sisig since the 1980s. So that is what a typical OED entry looks like. But sisig just happens to be quite a straightforward entry with one definition. But of course, depending on the word, the OED entry can be so much more complex. So for example, the longest entry in the OED currently is the entry for the verb to run, which currently has hundreds of senses and phrasal verbs and compounds and phrases. And it took one of my colleagues 9 months just to revise that one word because it's just so complex. But sisig, in this particular case, we have quite a simple entry. And then you can see on the right-hand side of every OED entry, you have information that tells you whether an entry is a new entry or whether it has been recently revised. So sisig is a new entry that entered the OED in the June 2018 update. And we provide this information because another thing that we need to be aware of when it comes to the OED is that it's a work in progress. So we are continuously revising existing entries and adding new entries. And we update the dictionary 4 times a year, so every quarter. And so every few months, there's a new version of the OED being published with new revised texts, with new revised entries and new entries. So that's why you can see in this section of the entry whether something is new to the dictionary, recently revised, or still unrevised. Right. So as I said, the dictionary is undergoing its first thoroughgoing revision and update since it was first published in 1928. So As you can tell, the OED is close to it's going very close to its 100th anniversary, so it itself is a very old dictionary. And the project employs over 70 editors who are based mostly in Oxford, just as I am, and also in New York. And the results of the current OED revision are accessible through OED Online. And as I have mentioned, updates are published quarterly. Okay, so you may ask then, how does the OED select words to include in the dictionary? So in Oxford Languages, you have many tools at our disposal to track the emergence of new words and senses. So what we do is we have a lexical monitoring program where we have many ways to find out which words we need to add to the dictionary. So one of the things that we do is to monitor language corpora. So a language corpus is a digital collection of texts is collected specifically for linguistic research. So we have one that is composed of billions, so billions with a B, billions of words that's updated regularly. And we have software that tracks this language corpus and tells us, okay, these words are currently being used quite frequently. We don't have that in the dictionary yet. Maybe we should consider including it. And we also have what we call the reading program, which is actually the original research program with which the OED track the emergence of words. So it involves a group of readers who read books for us and then underline interesting new uses of words and then send us back these quotations so that we can put them in our quotations database. So of course, when work first started in the OED in the 19th century, all of that was done on paper. So we sent books to readers, and then they would write the quotations in little slips of paper that they would later send to the OED. So right now, like in the office, we have a room which we call the quotations room, whose sole function is to house all these little quotation slips, and we have literally millions of them. So we still do that, but now we do that electronically. So the slips, so all the quotations are sent to us in digital form, and they are put in a digital database that OED editors use when researching and editing new entries. So we also analyze the content of published historical and current dictionaries, and also the work of other academic researchers on the English lexicon. And then we search through large databases of historical and modern texts. So nowadays, there are many services and databases online that store different kinds of English texts. So you have newspaper databases, book databases such as HathiTrust or Google Books. So we search those resources as well. And also we do some crowdsourcing. So when I described to you the reading program that the OED had been running since the 19th century, that actually makes the OED the world's first crowdsourced dictionary. And we still continue to ask for and respond to contributions from the public. And in fact, I think it was in 2018 when we published a batch of actually the batch that included Bonga, that one, the suggestions for the words that entered the OED in that update actually came from a crowdsourcing activity that we did a few years previously among Filipino speakers of English, and asking them which words they feel that the OED should include that use in the Philippines. So once we have a list of candidates to include, then we assess these candidates by researching electronic and paper research databases to make sure that there are several independent examples of the word being used for a reasonable amount of time and in reasonable frequency in the places one would expect to find them. So of course, like if I'm working on a word like sisig, which is the name of a Filipino dish, I wouldn't search for it in in a database of scientific journals, because I'm not likely to find it there, but I'm more likely to find it in, I'm more likely to search for it in Google Books, because it could appear in cookery books, in travel guidebooks, and also I could look for it in a newspaper database, because that's where people write food articles about food as well. So once I've looked at these databases and seen that the word is used with a reasonable frequency, then we can say, okay, we'll add this to the dictionary. But we don't have like a specific number. So we can't say, oh, if this appears X number of times, then it makes it in, because it really depends on the word. So a word that's used all over the English-speaking world, such as selfie, for instance, I mean, if you search for that in a database, you'll get millions and millions of hits. But a word that is specifically used, that is used in a specific part of the world, like sisig or bonga, of course, naturally, they will have less frequency, but that doesn't mean that they're any less important. So, so time spans and frequency thresholds vary with each word. And apart from frequency, the cultural, historical, and linguistic significance of words is also considered. So there are words that have, that are relatively young, that have been in the English language. So a great example of that is the word COVID-19. It was only a few months old. I think it was coined, COVID-19 was coined by the World Health Organization around January. And by April, it was already in the OED, because it had such a big impact on the world that we really didn't need to wait to add it into the dictionary. And there are also words that they're not overwhelmingly frequent, but they have certain salience or importance culturally or historically within a certain English-speaking population. So we include those kinds of words as well. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the recent Philippine additions to the OED. So what kind of words are they? So one interesting thing about regional varieties of English, such as Philippine English, is that borrowing is one of the main mechanisms of lexical innovation there. So it means that, and that is to be expected, because English is spoken in the Philippines along with many other both local and foreign languages. So with that constant contact between English and all these languages, it's just natural that many words will be exchanged between these languages and English. So in the case of Philippine English, we can see a lot of borrowings from other languages that Filipinos use. So Tagalog is one of them. And then, but foreign languages can also be a source of borrowings into Philippine English. For example, Spanish continues to, although Spanish is no longer widely spoken in the Philippines, it's still, after 300 years of colonization of Spain, of the Philippines, it has left, the Spanish language has left a lot of, a huge lexical footprint on our languages. And through that, you also get a lot of Spanish influence in Philippine English. So words such as that we are familiar with, using it in Tagalog and our other languages like barkada, despedida, estafa, or pandesal, these all ultimately come from the Spanish language. And then we also get loan blends, where we mix English words with borrowings from other languages. So we get combinations such as balikbayan box, barot saya, buko juice, buko water, despedida party, kikit, and sari-sari store. But there are other ways in which Philippine users of English create new words in Philippine English. So one example of that is derivation. So we take existing words and add affixes to them. So, for example, carnapper and presidentiable. We also take two words and put them together to create new compounds, such as batchmate. Or we take a word and then we cut them, make them shorter. So just like in the word mani-pedi. Or another thing that happens is there's a word, so we generally, what we call the exonormative standard in Philippine English is American English, because our colonial history has dictated that we learned English not from the British but from the Americans. So the the standard that we followed historically in the Philippines is American English, and sometimes there are words that we got from the Americans earlier in the history of English in the Philippines, and then they stopped using the word, but we continued using it. So that now the word is characteristic of Philippine English and no longer of American English. So one really good example of that is comfort room, or CR. So we didn't invent this word. So when we researched it, we found that Americans first started using comfort room in the sense of toilet or bathroom in the middle of the 20th century. So they used it for a few decades and then they stopped, but we didn't. We didn't stop. We still use it. So now comfort room is probably the most typical way that we would refer to a toilet in the Philippines. So that process is what linguists call fossilization. And then there is calking. So this process is where we take an expression in one of our languages and then we just translate it literally into English. So that's what happens with to go down. When we use the phrase to go down to mean to get off a vehicle. So, for example, if you're giving directions, you say, if you want to go to Mega Mall, go down at the Ortigas MRT station. So, British or American speakers wouldn't say that. They would say get off at Ortigas station. But Filipinos say to go down, and that is a calc from Tagalog, because in Tagalog we say bumaba, which is the same verb for going down the stairs and getting off a vehicle. So that's why we say to go down. So that's a process called calking. And then adaptive coining is when you take an existing word and then you adapt the meaning. So, for example, when we say advanced, when we mean actually a watch, when describing a watch that is fast or ahead of time. Or carnap, which is adapted from kidnap. So if you take a person, then you kidnap them. So then we created this logic of, okay, in that case, then if you take a car, then you carnap it. And then there's also conversion from one part of speech to another. So for example, high blood is a noun phrase in other varieties of English, but in Philippine English, it's also an adjective. So you can say, oh, I'm so high blood right now, meaning that you're very angry. And of course, initialisms and acronyms, we love that in the Philippines. So we have, especially now, we have, GCQ, MECQ, IATF, and all of these abbreviations. So some of those actually become lexicalized and become a permanent part of our lexicon. So for example, KKB to mean kanya-kanyang bayad is one very commonly used initialism in Philippine English. And then there is semantic change, where we just totally change the meaning of a word or phrase in English. So for example, in the Philippines, a dirty kitchen is not actually a kitchen that is dirty, but it's just, Filipinos who are fortunate to have enough space usually have two kitchens. So, the kitchen you have inside the house and the other one that's outside the house, that's probably the one that's more used because it has better ventilation outside, and that's called the dirty kitchen. I mean, it's not dirty, it's just the one that gets a bit more cluttered because, you use it much more often than the kitchen that you have inside the house. Or the word gimmick, which is in general English is a trick, but in Philippine English is a fun night out with friends. Or salvage, which means to save in general English, but in Philippine English means totally opposite. It has a totally opposite meaning of executing a suspected criminal without trial. And then the word, it's also important to note that the recent Philippine additions to the OED come from a variety of semantic fields. So they come from such subjects as the Filipino psyche, so things relating to our psychology and values such as bahala na, pasalubong, suke, utang na loob. So words that relate to Filipino customs and values. We also have greetings in terms of address. So terms of address such as ate, kuya, mang, aling, and greetings such as mabuhay. And items of traditional dress such as barong Tagalog and barot saya, and also several words pertaining to Filipino food and food customs such as barong Tagalog and oh no, sorry, there's a mistake there. So food and food customs such as, sisig, and the other dishes such as kare-kare, leche flan, adobo, of course, is in there, and food customs such as uh, pulutan and baon. So words like that. Okay, so far in this talk, I have talked a lot about the world Englishes. So not a lot, but I have mentioned the concept of world Englishes. So we do this work in the OED within the framework, within the scholarly framework of what linguists call world Englishes. So these are localized or indigenized varieties of English spoken throughout the world by people of diverse cultural backgrounds in a wide range of social linguistic contexts. So that includes Canadian English, Australian, Nigerian, Singapore, Indian, Irish, and of course, Philippine English. So why is this world English in lexicography important? So lexicography is the writing and creation of dictionaries, right? So why is it important to record world English vocabulary in a dictionary such as the Oxford English Dictionary? First of all, because dictionaries play such a central role in codifying and institutionalizing words, or not just words, but also varieties of English in general. So, for example, in America, it's generally recognized that Noah Webster's dictionary was really crucial in establishing American English as a variety in its own right that is distinct from British English. So once an English language speaking community has created a dictionary, that is a huge step in showing the world that, look, we are recognizing our variety as separate and as distinct from other varieties of English. And having a dictionary of that tells you that your word is officially part of the English language provides speakers of this variety authority and confidence in using these words, because dictionaries generally set notions of standard and correctness. So that really plays a role in recognizing separate variety as distinct, and therefore also plays a role in changing user attitudes. So, but I like to explain here that although dictionaries have had this kind of codifying or standardizing function, that is just how dictionaries are perceived by the public, but that is not actually what the role of the OED is. So as I have said repeatedly so far, the OED is a historical dictionary, and its purpose is to show the development of the English language over time. It is not there to tell you, hey you, now that bonga and sisig are already in the dictionary, then you can use it now. We give you the permission. That's not what it is. Although every time we publish a new Philippine English update in the OED, that's what people say, yay, we can use these words now. No, you've actually got it backwards, because a word will not make it into the dictionary if it's not already a word. And it's people, not dictionaries, who decide whether a word is a word or not. So as long as a reasonable amount of Filipinos have decided to use sisig or bonga or utang na loob or whatever when they speak English, then that tells us lexicographers that, okay, we should include this word in the dictionary. So it's not the other way around. It's not us lexicographers telling Filipinos, okay, you've been using this word for decades now, but when before that was totally illegal, but now we're making it legal. No, it doesn't work that way. So when people say like I'm the person responsible for putting these Philippine English words in the OED, that's not really entirely true. I may have been the person who researched and edited these words, but it's actually ultimately it's Philippine English speakers who are responsible for putting these words in the OED because they use these words in their everyday communication. So, but even by saying that, it's still true that a lot of people really, adding words into a dictionary and seeing them in a dictionary really changes people's attitudes towards their own variety of English and, somehow its worthiness, which is really, ironically, really goes against what the actual purpose of a dictionary is. But so there's that gap between the actual purpose of the dictionary and how people actually perceive this purpose to be. So why is it important for the OED to include Philippine English? It's because the OED wants to be and is the foremost authority on the history of the English language. But to continue to be so, it has to tell the complete story. And part of the story of English, especially today as it becomes an increasingly globalized language, is the lexical contributions of people who speak English outside the traditional centers of English, such as the UK and the US. So we have the OED, in order to make a complete record of the history of the English language, has to also include words that come from English-speaking communities in other parts of the world. And it's also important for the OED to show that lexical innovation in emerging varieties of English, such as Philippine English, goes beyond just loan words. So yes, we do borrow a lot from our other languages, but we also do other things to English. We actually have a high degree of lexical creativity, and that manifests itself in the variety and the different kinds of words that we contribute to the English language. And it's also crucial for the OED to show that the Philippines and other places where world Englishes are spoken have contributed more to the English lexicon than just plant and animal terms and other exotic words. English is a part of our everyday life, and we have included a lot of words that, as I've shown in the previous slide, there are many semantic fields that have contributed new words to the English language, and it's important for the OED to reflect that diversity and that variety. So let me go on now to the implications of all of this for English language teaching in the Philippines. So I was in the news in the Philippines recently. So I gave a webinar, I think, for the Philippine Embassy in Spain in last summer. Last European summer in August. I think it was because it was Buwan ng Wika, and the news covered it. And the headline says, "Philippine English is legitimate," says me, apparently. So in that talk, and I really emphasized the fact that, Philippine English is legitimate, but I'm not the only one who said that. We have Filipino linguists, Filipino scholars have been studying Philippine English as a variety in its own right since at least the late 1960s. And since then, there has been a constant stream of articles and conferences and that really provide scientific evidence of Philippine English being a variety of English that is distinct from American English, and it's just as legitimate. And that really has a big impact on how we teach English in the Philippines, because traditionally you've always adhered to what I've told before as the ex-normative standard of American English. So the traditional way of looking at things is that if a student in a classroom uses a word or in a sense uh, that is not American, or pronounces it in a way that is not American, that is incorrect. But since the middle of the 19th century, the 20th century, Filipino linguists and educators have been pushing back against that paradigm and increasingly recognizing that, since we were taught English by the Americans, so it's been decades, been over 100 years. So since then, we have changed the way that we have changed the English language, and we use it now in our own context and in our own way, with our own pronunciation, with our own words, with our own syntactic structures, and we should not be penalized for that. Another thing that and I know that given the nature of this conference, that most of you listening to me right now are English teachers. So there are a few concepts that I would just really like to stress, that I think would really give you like a different paradigm of how to think of language and how to teach it, right? So first of all, something that the OED as a historical dictionary really shows is that language change is part of language. So a language changes all the time, and that is normal. That is what happens. So the way that we speak right now is totally different from how people spoke English in Shakespeare's time. And it's totally different from how English was used in Chaucer's time. Okay, so English has existed for over 1,000 years in different parts of the world. Of course, it has changed. So just look at this example. I have here on the left different ways that this psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd," sorry, I forgot what psalm number it is, has been rendered in English throughout history, right? So you've got the modern version, which is, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me to still waters." So far, so good. This is how we would say this in contemporary English. But if you go back a few hundred years to the King James Bible of 1611, you see it's changed a little bit. So see, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." So immediately you see the verb is conjugated in a different way, right? But still quite understandable. In fact, people still read the King James Bible now, and still contains these forms, and people still understand it. So, okay, so far so good. But then if you go back in time even further to Middle English, okay, then things start to be a little bit more difficult, okay? In fact, actually, as in the OED, I am not allowed to do anything with examples of English from Middle English. So if I'm working on a word, and I see that it's a word that's old enough to go back to Middle English, and I have to stop and show the evidence to my other colleagues who are Middle English specialists, because they are the ones with the knowledge and the expertise to deal with this evidence, not me. So because it's so different from what we consider contemporary English. And so you can see the spelling is different, the verbal inflections are different, and the OED shows you those differences. So need to drink water. Right. So for example, the verb defail is something to lack that doesn't exist in English anymore, but you can still find it in the OED, but it's marked as obsolete. Or you have the verb to nourish, which is spelled in a different way, but the OED entry for nourish also in its summary of forms includes that spelling of NORISSED. And then if you go even further back to Old English, then it looks like a completely different language. So in the OED, we also have Old English specialists who have to deal with this period of the history of English. So you can see that in any language, change is constant. But the way that people generally look at language is that if something changes, then that's somehow bad. So people think that there's like this unitary ideal of a language brought down from heaven or whatever, wherever, and we have to stick to that. And if it something changes, then it's bad. You know, we have to keep the purity of a language. But how do you define what a pure language is? Where do you need to go back? Do we need to all go back to Old English? So language change, the only languages that don't change are dead ones. So Latin does not change because it's somehow fossilized like that because it's dead. Nobody uses it anymore. But something as widely used throughout the world and as dynamic as English, it's just normal for it to change, for people to do things to it. And that's not bad. And also, another thing that's interesting is that many people who speak a language of certain prestige like to think that there's something special about their language that accorded it such respect. So, for example, oh, English is so flexible, French is so beautiful, Latin is so logical. And this idea of prestige is so linked to our notion of what is correct, or what is admirable, and what is desirable. And we tend to believe that every language has this inherently logical, complex, and expressive standard dialect, and that any deviation from this is lazy or erroneous or inferior. But actually, what these things that we perceive to be innate qualities of a language, they're just reflections of our attitudes towards the language and what we think of them. So we think that the French language is romantic because we think France is romantic. We think that Paris is romantic, and we think that Latin is an intellectual language because it has for centuries been the language of the academic or the intellectual elite. So there's nothing really intrinsic to a language that determines its prestige or its lack of prestige. So from a purely linguistic perspective, all languages and all dialects are of equal merit. And prestige is just a non-linguistic concept that is much more social and cultural and historical than actually linguistic. And so you can see, for example, so on this slide, I'm showing you the key to pronunciation of Philippine English. And you can see here that we state different phonetic features of Philippine English and how they differ from the phonetic features of British or American English. So in the final sentence, it says Philippine English is similar to US English in retaining R after vowels wherever it occurs. So in the Philippines, we say mar instead of ma, like they do here in the UK. So that very concept, so American English and Philippine English, therefore, are both rhotic. So we pronounce that R sound at the end of words. So, but in British English, they don't do that. But in standard British English, that's a prestige. That dropping of the R is a prestige feature. So when you hear the Queen or Harry Potter say things like "ma," you think, "Oh wow, that's awesome." But that very same linguistic feature, that R dropping, in other varieties of English is seen as evidence of lower social status. So, for example, in the stereotypical New York and Boston accent, they also tend to drop the R. But since it's that opposite to the retaining of the R that's seen in standard American English, and that is considered somehow a less prestigious manifestation, but it's the very same linguistic feature. So when a BBC newsreader says car, then that's the Queen's English. But if an inner city New Yorker does the same, then it's Queen's English, and it's less prestigious. So this just to illustrate, there's nothing intrinsic about a language that makes it better than anything else. So what our perceptions of what is better, what is more prestigious, that is something that is defined not by the language itself, but by society and by economics generally. So I really hope that the OED and the way that it illustrates the actual historical development of the English language and its championing of Philippine English vocabulary can pave the way towards greater acceptance in the of Philippine English in the Philippine ESL classroom. So instead of treating our own words with suspicion or embarrassment, we could embrace these words and study them in classroom activities that explore how words evolve through time, how they reflect various aspects of Philippine society and culture, and how they serve as unique Filipino contributions to a global language. So, the authors Rose and Galloway in 2019 published this very interesting book called Global English as Language Teaching, where they call for a repositioning, a reimagining of English language teaching that responds better to the needs of English speakers or of students that are acquiring English and in an increasingly multilingual and globalized world. So they're promoting the idea of multilingualism rather than native speakerism in the classroom, the social cultural diversity and representation in English language teaching, and the adaptivity and dynamism of ELT classrooms. So that means that in contexts such as that we find in the Philippines, we should embrace the fact that we speak not more than one language, and that we should have space for this social cultural diversity and represent users of English in the classroom that are not, the traditional native speaker, such as an American speaker or a British speaker of English, so that we can have English language classrooms that can adapt to the needs of the students learning English in it, and because that is our purpose as teachers, right? Is to meet the communicative and educational needs of our students. And in the same, media coverage that followed that presentation I gave in August, I also said that being multilingual won't hinder English language learning. And this is another very important point, because many Filipino parents believe that for their children to be able to acquire English effectively, they have to only speak English exclusively. So, but if you live in the Philippines, if you live in Manila or you live in Cebu, that's, as a linguist, that doesn't really make any sense to me, because if you live in Manila, then, Tagalog would be, or Filipino would be part of your environment. And if you live in Cebu, Bisaya would be part of your environment. So why avoid it? So your child has that unique, well, not really unique, because it's much more common in the world to be multilingual rather than monolingual. But you have this opportunity there for your child to grow up multilingual. So not just bilingual, even trilingual sometimes. So why take that away when, probably in the future, if your child continues living in the Philippines, they would have to go outside your home and interact with people who speak more Tagalog or more Bisaya or another languages. So why put that barrier when it's not necessary? Children can acquire more than one language at the same time. Uh, and I remember because what we have in the Philippines is what we call because it's in context where it's not a different where different languages have varying levels of prestige in different domains within the same linguistic area. So when that happens, linguists call that diglossia or triglossia if you have more than three languages involved. So in the Philippines, you have triglossia because we have probably a regional language being used in the home, and then we have Filipino, the national language, being used in the home if you're in a Tagalog speaking family, or outside the home in school or in public spaces if not. And then you have English being used in the academe or in government, in science and in business and all of these other domains. So all of these languages coexist in the Filipino brain, right? And so a large chunk of our population is composed of simultaneous bi or trilinguals who are able to speak in the regional vernacular, in Filipino, or in English, depending on where they are, what they are doing, and who they are speaking to. But of course, since English is the language of business, science, education, government, and international communication, and all these things, then we give the highest level of prestige to English. So some parents think, okay, English is the most important language, so we should give precedence to that. We should give that, let's just ignore all the other ones because they're not important. But again, why is it not important? Why is the language of the home not important when those languages are the ones that are part of our culture and part of how and for many children, for me, for example, I mean Tagalog was my first language. This is how my brain first developed, and actually having Tagalog facilitated my acquisition of English, because by the time I learned how to read in English, I already had acquired some basic linguistic skills in Tagalog. So anyway, our languages don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I remember a friend of mine told me he lives in the UK now. He's lived here for a long time, but he told me he was a child in the Philippines growing up. He said he struggled a lot in his Filipino classroom because his parents were from Iloilo and they spoke Hiligaynon at home. And he said that his teacher told him that, oh, it's just because it'll be harder for you because you have Iligaynon, so of course Filipino will be difficult for you. And when he told me that, I was like, that's exactly, the opposite. Hiligaynon shouldn't, having that as your home language should not make Filipino difficult for you, because when you acquired this other Philippine language, already acquired basic linguistic skills that should have helped you in acquiring Filipino as well, especially since the two languages are related. So for me, what bothers me about what that teacher said is that you have a multilingual student in your classroom and you see that as a deficit rather than a benefit that can be exploited, that can be taken advantage of. So multilingualism is a good thing, not a bad thing. It can actually help us rather than hinder us in the acquisition of other languages. So recently, the OED revised its entry for code switching, and I wrote an article on the OED blog about it. And so I thought that I would spend a few minutes talking about it, because code switching is in the Philippines is the default. In many places in the Philippines, is the default mode of communication. But even then, although it's a default way that we communicate, it is seen so negatively by people. But linguists have done many studies that have shown that code switching, contrary to what people generally believe, is not random. It's not anomalous. It's not a sign that someone, like if you're code switching between Tagalog and English, let's say, it doesn't mean that you can't is because you're intellectually inferior or you're incapable of creating uh, of speaking either English or Tagalog individually. Actually, code switching is proven to be systematic, rule governed, and actually indicative of competence in each of the alternative languages. So you cannot code switch between Tagalog and English if you don't have at least a good grounding in Tagalog, in both Tagalog and English. So, because effective code switching requires a level of proficiency in both language systems. And just like monolinguals know how to form utterances that sound good when speaking in one language, code switching bilingual, so for example, Filipinos, when they speak in Taglish, they know when and how to switch. And you can actually differentiate between well-formed patterns of code switching and ill-formed ones. And also, several social psycholinguistic studies of code switching have shown its benefits to bilingual language processing and the positive effect of multilingualism on cognitive ability. So again, bottom line is multilingualism is something beneficial that we should embrace rather than abhor. Okay, so now let's move on to some examples of classroom activities where we can introduce all of these concepts that I've been talking to you about in the past hour. So, so for example, this first activity, its objectives is to introduce students to the concept of etymology, to present borrowing as a natural phenomenon in English, and to familiarize students with a few of the many languages that have influenced Philippine English. So in this activity, we explain what etymology means, and then we ask students, we show students words of different words from Philippine English, and then ask them to match them to their origin. So, for example, so we ask them, where does anise come from? Where does barangay, despedida, pancit, and kilig come from? So, anise, of course, comes from a Spanish word meaning armor, barangay from Malay word for a type of boat, despedida comes from a Spanish word meaning farewell, pancit is a Hokkien word meaning convenience food, and kilig comes from a Tagalog word meaning a thrill. So this activity just really shows students that, actually, the variety of English that we speak is a reflection of the many influences that exist in our culture, and it also gives them an awareness of the concept of etymology, of the fact that words can come from other languages, and how this is something that you can check in a dictionary entry. Here's an example of another activity which highlights the existence of different varieties of English and emphasizes that the differing yet equally valid forms of expression in two varieties exist and are both equally valid. So here we give students a series of American English words and ask them to translate them to Philippine English. So we say restroom. So for restroom, we say comfort room. For fast watch, we say advanced. A night out in American English is gimmick. In Philippine English, a cosmetic bag is a kikay kit. A presidential candidate is a presidentiable. A soap opera is a teleserye. And a nanny is a yaya. So in this kind of activity, we're just making the students aware that, American English and Philippine English both exist. We know we have a familiarity with both of them, but perhaps a closer familiarity with Philippine English because that's our native variety, and then that's fine, So this just makes them aware of the existence of different varieties of English and how they differ and lexically. Then this final example of an activity places Philippine vocabulary in a particular historical context. So here we explain that our national hero, Rizal, is a great lover of Filipino food, and he describes many native dishes and delicacies in his novels Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. And in fact, according to the OED, some Philippine food words were first used in English in Charles Derbyshire's translations of Rizal's works. The social cancer, which is the English translation of the Noli, and The Reign of Greed, the English translation of Fili, which were both published in 1912. So then we asked students to identify these words by giving them the definition. So of course, number one is the balot, number two is pansit, number three is sinigang. So all of these words are illustrated in the OED by quotations from the English translations of Noli and Fili. And then after this, we asked students to also cite other Filipino food words that Rizal used in his novels and asked them to define them as if they were adding them to the OED. So some of the words that Rizal uses are tinola, puto, galletas, escabeche, pesa, paco, lanzones, atis, chico, and achara. So all of those things appear in Rizal's novels, and not all of them are in the OED yet, but we're asking students to define them. So I think this activity is good for placing English language use in its historical context and linking it to a literary figure that students are already familiar with, that they have already heard of in their Filipino classes. They're probably even reading Noli Me Tangere and Filibusterismo already. So this is just linking that and to show, just to bridge English language usage with aspects of Filipino culture, and putting it in historical context also shows that, you know, our words are not aberrations. In fact, they have a long history. They have a long literary history, and it's good for us to study these words and use them, and to continue to use them in everyday communication in English. Right. So I'm just going to conclude with some advice on how you can first see the OED entries and to give you some more resources that are available on the OED's public pages to help you in your research and teaching. So the first is the OED is actually a subscription-based website, but some of the entries of the Philippine English entries are actually freely available. So if you go to this link that they put here on this slide, click on that, and you will find the list of Philippine English words, and then you can click through them and you can see the whole entries for free. And I also give you here links to the entries for bonga, dirty ice cream, and trapo. I'm sure I'm going to speak to the organizers about how I can share these slides to you so you can have access to the links. And the Philippine English pronunciation model, if you are interested at all in any aspect of Philippine pronunciation, I really recommend that you click on this link and see it. Our excellent pronunciation team in the Oxford English Dictionary, specialists in phonetics, have studied existing research on Philippine English. And, you know, I've spent hours with them just pronouncing Philippine English words so that they can create this model describing how English is generally pronounced in the Philippines, and that all of that information is freely available on the OED website. So I recommend that you check it out if you're interested at all in phonetics, phonology, or pronunciation. Some Philippine English entries are also available on lexico.com. So the dictionary that I showed you earlier. And also, I would like to emphasize at this point that I hope that I've made it clear that Lexico and other current dictionaries of English and the OED are both perfect dictionaries. I mean, a perfect dictionary, but are both perfectly suited for their purposes. So Lexico is really good for like everyday lookups of words. So if you just have a word in mind in current English and you want to know what it means, then Lexico, or even if you search for a word on Google and then a definition comes up, that definition also comes from Oxford Languages. So that it's the same data. So it's really ideal for those everyday dictionary uses. And the OED, on the other hand, is not ideal for that. What is ideal for is for research. It's for people who really want to study the evolution, the history of the English language. So these are two different kinds of dictionaries for different purposes. So you can see the simpler versions of the Philippine English entries if you search them on Lexicon. And I'd also like to say that that Oxford Languages has a COVID-19 language hub, which provides easy access to all of Oxford Languages research and resources, which which have been created to support academic researchers and students across the globe. So we share insights and analysis on the lexical impact of COVID-19. We show key COVID-19 terminology translated into the world's major languages, including Filipino, and we also provide educational resources to facilitate and support distance learning, and also information on accessing our dictionary resources. So the link is here as well. So this is the COVID-19 terminology translated from English to Filipino, also freely available from the Oxford Languages COVID-19 Language Hub. And the hub also gives you links to our student and teacher resources. So you have there a lot of information. So you have my picture if you're interested. And there that you will find a video there where my colleagues talk about the different aspects of their work, including ahead of pronunciations. And there's also me talking about my work on world Englishes, and there's also a section there on English around the world. So I really recommend that you check these links out. And finally, there's also freely available online is our 2020 Words of an Unprecedented Year report, where we talk about, so you know that every year we announce a word of the year, but in 2020 we thought that 2020 was a big kind of a thing, a big a deal, and we thought that it was with everything that happened in 2020, we needed, instead of just choosing one word, that it was important to discuss everything that happened through the lens of lexical change in English. So lots of commentary, linguistic commentary related to COVID-19, but there's also a section there specifically about world Englishes. So for example, here's a map showing how the lockdown has been called in different varieties of English. So it's lockdown usually in UK, Canada, and Australia, shelter in place in the US, circuit breaker in Singapore and the UK, MCO in Malaysia, and ECQ in the Philippines. But I've heard that we're making bubble a thing now, so that's something that we should monitor. Right, so if you're interested in that at all, please do check this out. This is also freely available. And that's it for me. So, wow, I've been talking for over an hour, but I'm happy to stay to have a bit of a discussion if any of you has any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salazar, for sharing a very informative topic. I personally love how you emphasize the word selection to be included in OED. And my personal favorite actually is the word pasalubong. I believe it reflects our unique Filipino culture, the bond among family members and friends. So what about our viewers? Can I know what is your thoughts regarding the talk of our very beautiful, I must say, and competent speaker this afternoon? Let me hear it from you, our dear viewers. From Abby, do we have any questions from our viewers? I believe Dr. Salazar is more than ready to answer our questions. From Sir Nick Nicolas, thank you so much, Dr. Salazar, for sharing your expertise. We learned a lot from your very comprehensive discussion and insightful sharing. Thank you so much po, Sir Nick Nicolas. All right, so do we have questions from our viewers? Thank you very much, ma'am, from Jennifer Oblivias. All right, thank you so much po for viewing. Okay, to our viewers, you may post your questions in the comment section, and I believe our speaker this afternoon is more than ready to answer your questions.
That's all
All right, I
right.
got it. Ma'am Salazar, I got it one question from other Facebook account, and that is from DepEd Philippines. Thank you, Dr. Salazar. It's amazing to know the features of OEED. But may I ask, how can this material be helpful in the development of the formal communication skills of our learners needed in formal medium and setting? This question is from Winifreda Dikit. Ma'am Winifreda Dikit.
Yes, good question. So I think that that question gives me an opportunity to also emphasize that Philippine English does not, because when we think of the way that we use English specifically in the Philippines, we think of it as slang, we think of it as informal language, but it's not necessarily that. There are some slang words and informal words like bonga in there, but I don't really see why any of words like pasalubong or utang na loob or salvage or gimmick, why these words cannot be used in informal settings. So the choice between using Philippine English or American English is not a choice between formal or informal language. Philippine English is a variety of English that can be used in both formal and informal settings. And so just because you're teaching Philippine in the classroom doesn't mean that you're teaching slang or you're teaching informal language. You can also teach. So if let's say you're teaching an academic writing course, I don't see why that cannot be taught using Philippine English. And I think that happens because, of course, I presented Philippine English through the lens of lexis, through the lens of lexicography. So I've shown you the words that are uniquely Filipino that have been included in the OED. But it's also important to know that although we have a number of words that are unique to Philippine English, there are also a number of words that we should also share with the rest of the English-speaking world. So just because you speak Philippine English doesn't mean that you're incapable of using, because Philippine English is still English, and a lot of it still a lot of our vocabulary is still part of the core vocabulary that is shared by all speakers of English, including American and British speakers. So because I think that's what happens sometimes, that when we talk about a variety of English, we always focus on what is different, so that's like the tip of the iceberg, but below all of that is the core of the language that we all share. So when you acquire Philippine English, you acquire all the Philippine elements, but you also acquire the general elements it shares. So I think it's a myth to think that, oh, if you speak Philippine English, and when you go to the UK or you go to Singapore, nobody will understand you. I have been living in the UK since 2012, and I don't very rarely. I don't think it's ever happened to me that, and I like to think that I still keep the English accent when I speak English. I don't speak like Harry Potter at all. I don't know if you've noticed, even after all the years here, and nobody really says, "Oh, stop, Danica, you don't understand," So when you acquire Philippine English, you're given tools to adapt. So if your life takes you to the UK or to India or to Singapore, then you have the tools there to adapt your language in order to be understood in these places. So the same with formal writing. If you're teaching a class in formal writing, then teach the elements of formal writing. And those elements also exist in Philippine English. And that's fine. So I think it's just a difference in looking at things. So don't ever think that Philippine English can only be expressed informally. So formal and informal, it's something. It's not direct. It's not mutually exclusive within a variety. So English, just like British English can be informal. So when you watch, just when you have like a bunch of British people just chatting in the pub and they're speaking informal British English, but when they're using it to speak in a conference like what we're doing right now, then they're speaking informal British English. So in the same way, we can continue using informal Philippine English when we're chatting with our friends, and in the classroom, we can teach our students how to use Philippine English formally. So use the elements of Philippine English to write texts, to speak at a conference, to write formal letters, and to do all these things that we do in informal contexts.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Salazar. I hope Ma'am Wenny's questions was answered by that. Okay, we have the next. It is good that we are gradually introduced about world Englishes and that Philippine English has its own features. What do you think is its implication in assessing students' outputs? Thank you, po.
Okay, so here I would like to emphasize that assessment, language testing, is its own branch of applied linguistics, and I'm not at all an expert in this. I think I did a class on language testing when I was doing my PhD, but I am not, I'm speaking as a lexicographer and as a linguist, but not at all as an expert in language assessment. So what I think is important when it comes to um, assessment is the assessment and measuring students' output is something that is dictated by the curriculum, which itself is dictated by the educational system. So if there is a standardized examination and your curriculum tells you that this is how you should assess it, then there's really nothing that a teacher can do about that, because that's what the standardized test uh, dictates. But so that's why testing is a little bit tricky, because when you are in a classroom setting where as a teacher you have the freedom to create your own tests and to assess it in the way that you want, then that's great. But normally, the assessment, the benchmarks that each student has to reach, these are set by the curriculum, by the school, and by the Department of Education. But what ideally for me as a lexicographer in the OED, I hope that by the OED recognizing Philippine English as a language in its own right will help influence the way that we set these benchmarks, so that the people or the teachers who are in charge of the Department of Education, are in charge of setting the curriculum, in charge of setting the assessments, will have a better understanding of how of what Philippine English is, so that when we're creating the assessment standards, we take into account Philippine English rather than American English as a standard. So of course, in the classroom, we can support the students as much as we can by not penalizing them. So when they're writing their theme papers or homework assignments, we could help by not penalizing them for using the features of Philippine English, not penalizing them for when they're speaking in the classroom and they pronounce things with the Philippine English accent. So all these things, but ultimately, if you really want to make a change with how to assess our students' outputs, this is more like a top-down thing. So the standards have to be changed, and for that, a general change a shift in linguistic paradigm and a shift in teachers is really required for this to happen. And hopefully, that now that there's more awareness of the concept of world English, this will happen.
Thank you so much, Ma'am. Thank you so much for the question, Ma'am Carmela Ana Reforma. Next, we have why we typically see some of the words mentioned like sisig being italicized when they are used in written text because they aren't considered as standardized. Since we now recognize this variety of English, does it also signal that in no time we won't need to italize these words?
Yeah, so it's important to stress that things like italicization, that's a totally stylistic thing. So there's no that's a stylistic decision made by editors, by writers, and somehow, and most of the time they don't really reflect actual usage. So, for example, the Philippine Daily Inquirer, which I love, I read the Inquirer all the time, but they have this habit of italicizing and glossing Philippine English words. So they would put, for example, sisig, and then
Yes.
in parentheses, a dish, blah, 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 which I find really funny because who reads the Inquirer but Filipinos who would know what sisig is anyway, you know? I mean, I understand if the New York Times put a gloss beside sisig because, you know, maybe New Yorkers wouldn't know what the sisig is. But I think it's safe to say that the general, you know, the bulk of the readers of the Philippine Daily Inquirer would know what sisig is. But still they do that because it's a stylistic choice that the Philippine Daily Inquirer as a newspaper makes. So, you know, it's completely, you know, putting glosses, italicizing, these are style choices made by individual publications, and we shouldn't ever take that as a sign that, oh, it's just that this word is not useful, or, you know, it's these things are totally separate. So that's why it's interesting sometimes when things do appear, where the Philippine English words appear in the Inquirer, and then they forget to put a gloss or they forget to italicize it, because I guess in a way that is an indication that the word is so embedded in our language that even the editors of the proofreaders of the Inquirer didn't notice them enough to italicize them. So yes, I agree with what you said, that maybe if the more people use the words, and the more natural sounding they become in English, and the less people writers feel the need to italicize them or mark them out in a certain way. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ma'am Cristel Ordones, for that question.
Hmm.
We are down to our last two questions. Do we still have questions there, Ma'am Abby? Thank you very much for sharing your insights. This is really a very interesting topic, and we really learned a lot. Hopefully, you can inspire more people. This is from Ma'am Carmela Ana Reforma. Thank you so much, Ma'am Carmela.
Mhm.
Maybe it is time for us to use our own Philippine language in the Philippine curriculum. We can start as teachers. That is absolutely correct, Ma'am Jennifer Oblivias. Okay, so I think another comment. Thank you so much po for this comprehensive discussion. So I think we don't have questions anymore. Once again, thank you.
Well, then that just gives me, I guess, this opportunity to say as well that most of you in the audience are English teachers. I mean, it's very difficult to underestimate how important your role is in in promoting the use of Philippine English, because it's you, especially those who teach in the earlier grades. You know, it's from you, and it's in your classroom that students generally have probably their first contact with English. And if there's one advice that I could give you, is that instead of focusing on, of course it's important for students to reach the benchmarks and to teach them, but I think one of the best things that we can do in the classroom is to inspire curiosity in our students, to make English not a
Correct, correct.
burden, not it, because English in the Philippines, I see it's seen as something intimidating. It's seen as some a chore that you need to learn, when in fact it's just another language that can open so many doors to literature, to television shows. So it's a language that can be enjoyed. It's a language that can be a part of your life. And if there's a way, I think it, a student offers play a role in in showing English in this way, not just something that is hard because you have to learn the intricate grammar and remember these difficult grammatical terms and things like that, instead of actually something that can help you enjoy, Hollywood movies more, or enjoy books more. So it's just put more emphasis on the reading, especially the reading of Philippine authors. I think what's really great now compared to when in my time, when my parents' choices to my reading material were much more limited. Now I have friends in the Philippines who are parents, and they show me such a great uh, new selection of children's literature written by Filipino authors, um, that really use the English and tell stories in the Philippine context. Whereas when I was a child, I felt like I was reading, American things and reading British things. Whereas now, I think there's much more opportunity for. There's so many more Filipino authors like writing Filipino, and these are materials that we can use in our classroom to encourage our students to learn English and to enjoy English and learn about English as a language rather than be afraid of it, and also, huwag kayong mahiya na mag-Tagalog or mag-switch ng language. Kasi, I guess yung buong talk ko was like, English ko siya kasi nasanay ko discuss lahat ng mga about only in English. Pero, kaya ko rin naman gawin yun like in Tagalog. So, wala namang masama that. That's a skill. Yung switching na yan, it's a skill that our students have. So, we have to learn how to harness that and just tell them there are some contexts where it's okay to code switch, and there's some contexts where it's not. And learning a language is really that, is knowing when to use the right word. More than, learning subject-verb agreement and all this grammatical. Effective language use is knowing which words to use in which context. And really just don't look at our students like as a deficit. Don't look at a multilingual child speaking Tagalog or any other Philippine languages na papasok sa classroom mo, and then you think, oh, there's something wrong with you. You have to erase your brain so you can absorb English, So the child that's entered in your classroom already has the basic skills, only probably in a different language, but we can harness that in the acquisition of English. So just that, I guess, is the most important takeaway from this talk, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Matt. I love that word, that specific effective language use is knowing a specific language to be used in a certain context. Thank you so much, Ma'am Danica, for that very good reminder to all of us. So we have here maybe our last question, Ma'am. Since you mentioned a while ago that multilingualism is not a hinder to learn English, I want to know if it is fine to let the students speak in their mother tongue or in Tagalog to express their thoughts or ideas in an English class often. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, I think it's just that I don't know how things are right now, but when I was growing up in the Philippines, the way that it was when I was in school in the Philippines, a couple of decades ago, is that in the English classroom you have to speak English. Every Tagalog word that comes out of your mouth, you have to pay you have to pay a fine. So it's so what bothers me about that is that the idea of penalizing or of punishing students for having the instinct to speak in their native tongue as if they're bad for doing that. So that to me is the wrong thing. Of course, it's natural for us to expect our students to speak a lot in English because it's an English class. You can't learn English if you're not going. You can't teach English well if you don't encourage your students to express themselves largely in English in the English classroom. Of course, I mean that's not wrong, but for me, it has to be encouragement. You shouldn't scare students into not saying Tagalog words. You shouldn't punish them for it and make them feel deficient somehow, because they are, multilingual, and their brains are adjusting to that, switching from one language to another, and the role of a teacher is to facilitate that switch, because things are going on in the brain, and punishing students and scaring them to not to suppressing their other languages, I think is counterproductive. So I guess my answer to that is yes, you encourage students to speak in English in an English class, to write in English in an English class. But if as they negotiate the activities that they're doing in the classroom, they can't help but switch, and a word or two escapes them, don't punish them from it. And in fact, use that and say, okay, my students switched here. What does that tell me about what they're learning and what they're not learning? So it's just looking at code switching as a way to better acquire English rather than something that needs to be punished. So it's something that we can actually analyze to see, okay, what does this tell me about what my student is understanding from the activity that we're doing right now. So that's my take on that.
Thank you so much po, Ma'am Rosemary Balila. All right, that has been a very comprehensive discussion. So joining us this afternoon also is our regional supervisor in English, the OPA behind this event, Dr. Jonathan S. Cadavido. Sir, good afternoon.
Good evening, Philippines, and good morning, United Kingdom.
All right. Okay, and Dr. Salazar, Dr. Jonathan will help us in presenting our certificate of recognition to our very dynamic resource speaker this evening.
On behalf of our Regional Director, R.D. Panchet Bringas, our Assistant Regional Director, A.R.D. Ruth Fuentes, the Chief of the Curriculum and Learning Management Division, Sir Hob S. Zape Jr., it is with great pride and honor to present the certificate of recognition to our keynote speaker for the second day of the 2021 CALABARZON English Language Conference. Let me read the citation. Republic of the Philippines, Department of Education, Region 4A, Calabarzon, Certificate of Recognition. This certificate is awarded to Dr. Danica Salazar, World English Editor, Oxford English Dictionary, Oxford University Press, United Kingdom, in grateful acknowledgement of her expertise as keynote speaker during the 2021 CALABARZON English Language Conference with the topic Philippine English in the Oxford English Dictionary and its implications for the English language teaching in a multilingual Philippines, conducted by the Department of Education Region 4A Calabarzon through the Curriculum and Learning Management Division, held on March 25 to 27, 2021 via Google Meet, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. Given this 26th day of March 2021 through Google Meet, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. Signed, Francis Cesar B. Bringas, Regional Director. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Salazar, for sharing your time and for giving us an insightful talk. Thank you for being with us despite our differences in terms of time and distance. Thank you po, and God bless you po.
Thank you, Sir Jonathan, and thank you, Sir Greg, for hosting. Thank you for that lovely introduction at the beginning as well, and thank you for this lovely certificate. And I'd also like to say that I am now officially a citizen of Calabarzon. Because I am actually from Caloocan, that's where I grew up, but my grandmother has always lived in Rizal, in Taytay.
Oh.
So I would spend my vacations and weekends there. But since last year, my parents have actually moved to Rizal to be with my grandmother. So when I go back to the Philippines, Calabarzon will officially be my home base in the Philippines. So it's very special for me to receive this invitation from you and to be able to speak to language educators from Calabarzon, my new home region.
Welcome to Calabarzon po.
You should say welcome to Calabarzon, Ma'am Danica. Okay, thank you so much, Ma'am Danica. Once again, let us shower our speaker with virtual applause and heart reaction. And of course, nakasama rin po natin ang OPA behind this event. Po natin, Dr. Jonathan Escadavido. Thank you so much po, ma'am and sir.
Thank you po. Thank you po.
Thank you so
Doc.
much,
Thank you, Sir
everyone.
Greg.
Bye.
It has been a wonderful day two of CELCon 2021. Tomorrow, our CALABARZON teachers will showcase their teaching demonstration. Do not forget to follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel, CELCon 2021. We would like to thank our streaming partner, the Division of Laguna Province, and DepEd Philippines Facebook page. Allow me also to greet the members of the 2021 CELCon Regional Technical Working Group. What about Carrie RTWG? Palakpakan po natin sila. Headed of course by our event director, Sir Ethan. And of course, our 21 dynamic English supervisors. Patawarin po ako ng iba. Special mention to my EPS in English, Ma'am Winifreda Dikit, across Calabarzon. And of course, greetings also to my teammates from Francisco P. Tolentino Integrated High School. Once again, I am Greg Loberia Sangalam from the Division of Cavite Province, City of Tagaytay, saying thank you and mabuhay. I am CELCon.
Ang mga teacher, walang ginagawa.
Napakahirap po ng setup po ng pag-aaral ng mga bata.
Hindi na ako nagtrabaho.
So, nag-worry po.
Nag-aalala po at malungkot.
Naging mahirap yung 2020 para sa atin. Ito yung nagbigay ng malaking hamon. So nasan ba tayo sa pagpapatupad ng mga kinakailangang reforma para maipagpatuloy ang edukasyon sa kabila ng challenges ng COVID-19 pandemic? Calabarzon, kaya nating sabihin na nakapaghanda. Kagaya tayo na nakabuo ng isang Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan at ito ay ating naisumite ng May 27 of 2020.
The use of the pivot modules was planned before the pandemic. Actually, ang design ay sinimulan nung time na nagkaroon ng Taal eruption.
The pandemic actually gives rise to the idea of Pivot 4A. This has provided the framework on how we shall manage the delivery of educational services using all four components. Intent, the competencies, the learning experiences, and as well as assessment.
The three words that I can use in describing pivot is one, it's flexible, it's adaptive, and at the same time, aligned to the call of sulong edukalidad.
So if I'm going to describe Pivot 4A as a response to this pandemic, I would say that this has something to do with the reform, a response, and at the same time, a result. The use of pivot modules has completely turned around the direction to a more manageable one.
We want our teachers, we want our stakeholders not to feel the burden of the pandemic or not even feel the hardship in teaching and learning. The lesson exemplars or the LEAP and the link, these materials are really suited to the needs of the learners. We feel that the pivot materials are the appropriate materials needed by our learners, especially in terms of their context and needs. This time of pandemic, we need to produce and design materials that are suited to the demand of each of the learners in their respective learning spaces. Ipinag-isipan ng rehiyon na pag ibinaba ito ay madaling ma-implement at bagaan sa ating mga magulang, sa ating mga teachers, at sa ating mga mag-aaral.
Yung mga objectives o yung mga competencies na dapat naming ituro. So yung nakapasok doon, yun yung pinakamahalaga na dapat naming ituro sa bata.
Nakikita ko po sir, nung lumabas yung module na yon, sabi ko, mas magaan.
Inihanda po nila ang guro sa pagharap sa mga hamong ito. Binigyan po nila ng maraming kaalaman at impormasyon tungkol sa pivot at sa ibang mga bagay na makakatulong para maibahagi sa mga bata.
We want our teachers, we want our stakeholders not to feel the burden of the pandemic or not even feel the hardship in teaching and learning.
Sa paanong paraan mo masasabi na napadali ang iyong pag-aaral gamit yung mga materials na ito? Yung mga modules na natatanggap mo na galing na sa school, na binibigay sa yung nanay.
Ano po, babasahin ko na lang po at itatanong ko na lang po kung ano yun.
Mayang magulang, ano po yung tulong na ibinibigay nyo sa inyong anak sa paggamit ng module?
Binabasa ko po muna, tapos saka ko po ina-explain sa kanya.
Ano po yung role na ginagawa ng teacher para nang sa ganun po ay matugunan yung inyong pong problemang kinakaharap?
Ayun, kapag meron po hindi maintindihan, pwede naman po magtanong kay teacher, palagi naman po siyang naka-off.
This is a product of hard work, sleepless nights, no Christmas break. So, hindi po madali ang pinagdaanan ito. Ito po ay pinag-isipan ng mabuti, pinuna, ibinasto, at pinagsikapan na magawa upang ang kalidad ng edukasyon ay ipagpatuloy sa panahon ng pandemya.
Kung bibigyan po natin sila ng module, malaki pong katipiran ang nagawa ng ating rehiyon sapagkat nagpatupad lamang po tayo ng pivot module na 1 quarter, 1 module. Dahil nakatipid po tayo sa gastusin, nakapagbigay po tayo ng 11,233 to be exact na units ng tablets na ibibigay po natin sa ating mga senior high school, initially, students.
Sa kasalukuyan, ang self-learning module mula sa rehiyon ng Calabarzon at kilala sa tawag na pivot ang ginagamit sa ating itulay online class.
Very happy po. At least na-access po namin kasi it's very helpful po talaga. Kasi ang hirap maghanap ng mga SLM ngayon, sir. Nakatulong naman po talaga on our part as a teacher and then para din po sa mga learners namin. Nakatulong po, honestly.
Sa lahat po ng stakeholders na gumabay at tumulong sa atin, mga PTA officers, sa ating mga sangay ng mga pamamanihala, sa mga division, sa SDOs, sa tulong at pamamatnubay ng ating mga schools division superintendents at maging ng kanilang mga kaagapay na mga tagapamanihala. Kinikilala natin at pinasasalamatan yung kanilang naging tugon sa pagharap sa hamon na to. Kaya ba natin?
Sana po. Ready po.
Ang buong suporta.
Laban lang. Nakasupport po kami mga teachers.
Gusto ko din naman po.
Natutuwa talaga na pusa ninyo itong ginawa. Sana ipagpatuloy ninyo ang inyong creativity. Sana ipagpatuloy ninyo ang pagiging responsive sa pangangailangan ng ating departamento.
Ito ay hindi lang laban mo o laban ko, kundi laban nating lahat ito.
Kaya natin ito! Laban natin!